All right, welcome back, Moses. Long time no see. How have you been?
Yeah, thanks for having me back on again. It has been a while. When was the
Yeah,
last time you and I talked on this show?
a couple years at least. We talked about the recent adaptation of Gawain and the Green Knight, and that
Yes,
was
that's
lovely.
right.
And then years before that, it's been many years now since we talked about video games on air, and that was with Xenogears, actually, back in
Yeah,
the day.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. But today we're talking about games, but by way of a book, your book, the definitive book of SNES RPGs, and it's there. I see it. So we've got the text to refer to here. But I wanted to start out just asking about why you wanted to write about this particular genre on this particular system of all the possible games that you might write about. Why these? Why were these the ones you chose?
Sure. And yeah, a couple of thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
I really do appreciate it. And thanks for being curious about the book. Thanks for picking up a copy as well.
yeah,
I appreciate that
my
very
pleasure.
much. Um, you're one of the people I know who read through the whole thing. A couple people have read through it twice, and I'm like, wow, I haven't read through it twice. So well
Dude.
done on you. And so this book, the origin of it was really collaborative. So I had worked closely with a guy named 8-Bit Steve. He's a speedrunner and an author.
Yep.
Um, uh, Super NES expert. I mean, the guy he's a world record holder for some of his speed runs, and he's working on a couple books. He's published a couple books on NES stuff. So he initially reached out to me after I had written a couple articles for him. He wrote some articles for me, and he was like, "Hey, you want to work on a book series?" I was thinking about something called the Definitive, and we could kind of come up with a list of things. And he's like, I thought of you for RPGs. And he's like, would you like to do an NES RPG book? And I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. And then I thought about NES RPGs and I was like, nah. Nothing against the NES or anything. I really love the NES. It's like my second or third favorite system of all time. Um, but I don't actually really like most of the NES RPGs. I put together a list and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of CRPG ports on here. It's like 5 Dungeons and Dragons games on there. So it's a little on the rough side. Even Final Fantasy 1, sometimes I'll go back and I'll play Final Fantasy 1 on NES. I'm like, how did this start
Hmm.
a huge franchise? Because it's not that great.
Yeah,
I have a hard time with it because I didn't grow up with FF1.
yeah.
I really like Dragon Quest. I think Dragon Quest is exceptional. I think there are great action RPGs on NES. Zelda 2 comes to mind.
Mhm.
Um, Crystallis is really good, stuff like that. So, um, I actually countered his offer with, well, what about a Super Nintendo um, RPG book? To my mind, the golden age of console RPGs starts with the Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
It maybe ends with the PS2. The end of the PS2, not the launch of the PS2. I think the PS2 had excellent stuff. But
Yeah.
just those generations, those 3 generations had RPGs that continue to top people's lists. Uh, I don't think it's any mistake that when you look at a lot of people's best of all time, they're gonna share some similarities, and I've kind of tested that. I experiment on people, I'll admit. We
Mhm.
got our Discord, so when new people join, I'll be like, what are your top 10 games of all time? And a lot of the times there are shared titles, and a lot of the times they're the real obvious ones: Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 7, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I kind of countered with that concept. He was like, "Great, I think that's awesome." Now his concept was really more of a ranking these games kind of thing,
Mm.
which I started writing and for some reason didn't go in that direction at all. What I eventually kind of evolved this text into was these essays that are sort of inquiring about what these games mean,
Mm.
what they're about. I did not want to write something that you could read on the back of a box or on, just a random website. It's kind of explaining the gameplay and things like that. I'm like, if you want an explanation of gameplay, or if you want a review of the games, you can find thousands of those online. But personal reflections, and analyses of themes, the philosophy of some games, the theology of some games, I think is really fascinating, and I think hasn't really been discussed, certainly comparatively, not to the extent that these games have been reviewed.
Totally.
So he wound up being surprised at the direction that it took. The project wound up becoming a lot more complex than we initially thought. This was initially a single volume book concept. Uh, by the time I got through half of volume one, I was like, this is like a 1,200 page book. Like, I can't, we cannot publish this as one volume, you know, especially in a hardcover format. So
Yeah.
splitting into volume two was something I also proposed to him. He was initially skeptical at first, if I remember right. But Steve and I have really good communication, so we talked back and forth for a while, and it was just a landmark moment in the evolution of this concept. So now volume one is A through K, volume two is L through Z, um, and that's how we wound up with this book.
The numbers are a little bit imbalanced. I noticed. I was counting them. I was like, how many are in here? Okay. So
Yes,
the initial one has 22, if I'm counting right. And
hmm
then the second book will have the remaining 25. If
something like
I
that. Yeah,
Okay. And
25,
so
26. Yeah.
something like that. And so, but I guess that's balanced out by the fact that this one also includes stuff like why this project. The personal reflection piece is kind of in the form of an introduction to the book as a whole, right? The volumes taken together, and I thought that was also really substantial and really important. And you also give, of course, your sort of definitional framework for what is an RPG. What am I including in this book, in this first volume? And so I
hmm
don't know if you wanted to discuss a little bit of that. There's a lot of discussion about that for listeners of the Retro Logic podcast, right? There's
Yeah.
a pretty lengthy discussion you all get into there. So I don't want to kind of like rehash anything that was already said about it.
Sure.
But um, but yeah, if you wanted to maybe even just read, like, would you be willing to read a little bit of the somewhere? It's an introduction, and it's got a title, Somewhere Elsewhere in Another Time. Do you want to just read like a
Sure.
paragraph or two of that?
I would be delighted.
That'd be
Let me
awesome.
see. I'm gonna pull that up here. Is there a particular paragraph or section that you had in mind for me to read from that, or?
I want to know how to pronounce some of the words in the first couple paragraphs. So do you mind reading
Sure.
those?
The
Okay.
Hawaiian stuff, sure.
Selfishly, yes, yes.
Yeah, no problem. Um, okay, so this is my intro to the book. This follows the forward. Somewhere elsewhere in another time. Thick clouds of fog billowed under the rainforest's cool evening breath. The breeze teased at the plastic windows, rattling them like the taut surfaces of jungle drums. The year 1990X. The place, the house my dad built in a clearing on 3 acres, land crowded with ancient lava tubes, fruit bearing forests, and unfathomable shadows beneath trees. Guava, banana, ohia bent to the rhythm of the Pacific's sighing. In the backyard, the water catchment pool stared up at the Milky Way like a giant mirrored eye, catching a glimpse of dying starlight, clearer and brighter than most anywhere else in the United States. A rain was coming on, ready to fill the pool, already drumming against dark leaves and sharp black igneous rock. Above it all, majestic Mauna Kea raised its snowy head, the tallest mountain in the world measured from its base beneath the sea. The ocean endlessly beat its waves against the mountain's slopes, but couldn't tear it down. The sacred summit, or but couldn't tear down the sacred summit, and it wouldn't for many millennia to come. Kilauea laughed at the ocean with torrents of incandescent stone, its red aurora like a rainbow of garnets glowing in the night sky. This is paradise, and I grew up in it playing video games.
Lovely. I think that's
Thanks.
so good. and it situates us in the personal right first, and what this experience was like for you, and you talk about the generator, right? The sound of the generator that goes
Oh
with,
yeah, toward the end.
yeah.
Yeah. Dad had a generator that powered the house. It didn't have electricity, it didn't have running water. Um, it didn't have regular plumbing. It was a curious way to grow up. And I'm always sort of I'm not really sure how to say it. Not put off
Mm.
by, I don't feel ostracized or anything like that. But people will share their childhood and it'll be a lot like some of those pictures that you'll see sometimes on the internet, like, the perfect 80s childhood room, and it's like posters of everything from, Batman, Speed Racer, and Looney Tunes and Space Jams all over the place. Well, 90s. Uh and there's the neon lights, there's the pink and purples, and that's not what my childhood looked like. But I think there are a lot of similarities, but there also are a few differences. And in that intro, what I wanted to do was sort of um, build that case for, this is my perspective on these games. Like, yeah, the book's called The Definitive, but it's really a definitive
Yeah. Yeah.
view of these games.
Well, and I think of this as like the generator for the project in a way, right? Is like these memories, the power of the nostalgia that goes with the feeling of these games and the memories that it evokes. I think that for many people who grew up during this time, it was a kind of paradise, right? Whatever your circumstances might have been, and that
Mhm.
in some way, these games are like windows into that, mirrors that reflect that back, or somehow you're tapping into that as you write about this. Was it like an enjoyable experience to write about at least the games that you grew up playing? I mean, uh, I know that there's some games in here that probably either you didn't play or you didn't maybe love the most,
Yeah.
but by and large, like, yeah, was writing about these a way of, sort of connecting with your own past and your own, childhood?
Yeah. So you're right. I didn't play all of these as a kid. I played most of these as a kid. Uh, there were several that I'd never played before that really blew my mind. Lufia 2 is right up there as probably the most mind blowing that I hadn't played as a kid. And I wish I had, because what a cool game. Um, Game I'm playing right now, Uncharted Waters New Horizons, which is like a sailing sim RPG, a sequel to the previous Uncharted Waters on this same system, is just marvelous. And it feels like a single player MMO on a Super Nintendo, which is just, it's not at all a game for everybody. It's very modular, it's very granular, it's very menu
Yeah.
driven. It can be very tedious. It's very slow, it's very relaxing. A couple times I've played it, I felt like falling asleep, but it's very fun, and I'm consistently surprised at how much is in it. So yeah, all that to say, I didn't play all of these. There are a few that I did not care for, to put it lightly. The running gag in our chat on stream is the Koei curse.
Hmm.
So that is Inindo Way of the Ninja, Uncharted Waters 1, and Uncharted Waters New Horizons. I couldn't finish the first of those, the two of those three games on stream. It just got too stressful. Inindo in particular uh, was real rough. So writing about those, because again, I'm not writing reviews.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out how to be fair and generous towards those games in the text in such a way that I'm avoiding certainly what is a very popular perspective on video game criticism today, driven by YouTube, which is rage reviewing, right?
Yeah.
Specifically for comedy. That's one thing that I think a lot of people miss. Is this is a comedic approach. It's not a serious approach, but I've met a lot of people who take it as if it is. So I didn't want to write about those games like that. I wanted to write about what they mean. I wanted to write about what they do in well or not, but also their context. Certainly in the 1990s, but also their context within a larger scope of literature or film or music.
Yeah.
And as far as connecting back to to childhood, then that's sort of something that dawned on me halfway through this project. As on a personal level, I was becoming more involved with Hawaii. So,
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, there were those really terrible, horrific Maui fires, um,
Mhm.
and I was not. I don't think I was emotionally prepared to witness that on TV happening, and I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
But the destruction of property, human lives, obviously extremely tragic. And on top of that, the destruction of historic and cultural items of significance and landmarks. I think was really difficult to watch from the vast distance of across the Pacific and the North American mainland. So yeah, I immediately felt helpless. But the day that happened, I told my wife, I think today's the day I become an activist. And that experience of trying to figure out what I can do to support my homeland and my people from a distance um, became a part of me in a way that trickles down back to this book. So, in meditating on, thinking on, um, my parents' generation getting older and kind of fading out, and my generation now being responsible to carry that torch for Hawaii. Um, how do I do that as somebody that lives in a completely different state? And so it dawned on me that I'm writing this book about 1990s RPGs on the Super Nintendo, and there's an element in which I consider that preservation,
Yes.
because I'm preserving uh, the stories within the games, but the stories surrounding the games. We have got guest writers in there. I tell personal anecdotes as well, but then the stories, outside of the games as well, and that's again that context within history, context within other art forms. And so the book also opens with a timeline. You can kind of set these games within that broader context of the industry as it was in the early or the mid 80s on towards the mid 90s. So that's where that idea connected. Is I'm like, Hawaii needs that element of preservation, so do these games as well. And so that's where that idea came home for me for this book is
Yeah.
an act of preservation, culturally as well. I know a lot of people will talk about video games as like, well, they're just games, and they are just games. I've said that myself.
Hmm.
Um, and being just games, they are just a part of culture as well. But that gives them a also a kind of significance that I think goes beyond the deconstructed kind of brute elements of what they're made of. That I've said before, games are made of math. That's
Hmm.
about it. Do we need to preserve math? Yeah, we need to teach math and stuff like that. But like, what's one uh what's one equation next to another? But what they mean in a broader scale is I think what's important. So can you still hear me, by the way?
I'm hearing
I'm
you.
sorry to ask.
Your camera decided to just
Oh,
take a
I can't
walk.
hear you actually.
Oh, uh-oh. I'll give you a minute.
Hang on one second.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, we figured it out. Or at any rate, it's working again. The math is mathing, as the kids say.
yeah,
And well, so I was wondering, kind of as a follow on a bit. I mean, I do want to come back to that about
sure.
the preservation piece, but what is it that you like about these games? What is it about
Yeah.
these particular RPGs? But RPGs in general, this is a topic that kind of came up in the discussion with the retro logic folks, like trying to define genre for them. For some of them, it sounded like kind of came down to how can I find a game that's like this other game I like? Because that's what I
Mhm.
really want is like another game to play that's good, for me.
Yeah.
And so for you, what are the elements you identify a number of elements and you sort of catalog and put them into categories, categorize. Um, but yeah, what are the elements for you that make these games so great and that you really enjoy about them?
Yeah, so I think there's really two questions there. I'll address kind of the broader one. Where you're right that we talked about. If you're listening, you haven't heard the Retro Logic podcast, you should go check that out. Um, but the usefulness of genre, right, and the usefulness, therefore, of the definition, is certainly on the consumer side. You know, how do you recommend a game to somebody? How do you tell somebody, you know, this is similar to that without getting into really nitty gritty things when you can just use a sort of a category or subcategory? How do I know that Legend of Dragoon and, let's say Hyper Light Drifter have some similarities but are still different genres, right? So that's the usefulness of genre. And I think there's other useful things about it as well. But for me, then the value of the genre, I think that's the value of defining the genre. The value of the genre itself, I think, in role playing is that ability to inhabit a character and
Mm,
make decisions either as them or with them. I think as them is a little more CRPG and with them is a little more JRPG, if you like.
hmm.
Obviously, those are very broad strokes. So there's a ton of whataboutisms that you could, come up with after that statement.
Sure.
But that's generally speaking. But that kind of that singular journey that you make with a character, whether that's reflected in terms of gameplay, say in a dungeon crawler, or in terms of narrative, say in a JRPG, um, that's sort of the draw of that. Now, as far as these games in particular, the Super Nintendo RPGs, I thought about that a lot. What makes these games, PS1 RPGs, um, those two systems people really think of as the golden age?
Yeah.
Why, right, is the
Yeah.
question. With PS1, you're looking at early 3D. With, Super Nintendo, you're looking at late 16-bit. And I think it comes down to a lot of things like limitations and conciseness, leanness, not having that ability to put everything in there.
Mm,
At a certain point, restricts and focuses something. These games cannot be Mickey Mouse. It's certainly not in their original context. I mean, obviously, people can make mods and hacks and
oh yeah.
homebrews, and there could be remasters and re-releases and remakes that, regurgitate everything in a way that completely recycles, what these games were, and turns them into something else. But in their original context, when you put a cartridge in, it is going to be the same game that you played in the 1990s. And I think that's a really refreshing thing in a game industry today where things are so in constant flux. Having written about video games as a critic for a while, I remember when we were reviewing, uh, I think it might have been Pokemon Go when that came out. And a friend of mine asked her, like, why review this game when in a couple months it's going to be a different game, right? I was like, that's a great question. It's an honest question, but you would never ask that of a Super Nintendo game,
Yeah.
right? Um, Often say that, people will be like, well, that game hasn't aged well. And I'm like, the game has nothing to do with aging. It's the same thing.
We've aged.
You aged. Yeah.
Yes.
Like we've talked about this, I think.
Yeah.
You're the one who's aged. Like your expectations, your experiences, your energy levels, your reception of stimuli, all that's changed. Your memories, everything. But that game's going to be the same game. So if you pop it in and expect that you're going to interact with it like you're a 10-year-old again, not going to happen. You know why? Because you're not 10 years old. It's really as simple as that. Um, so I don't think replaying these was about sort of capturing that childhood, magic.
Right.
Although there's certainly a part of that. Um, but it's sort of looking at them in a way that I would look at them age 40 versus look at them age 15. Um, because I couldn't write a book like this at age 15, but I can write a book like it now. So that kind of difference, I think, is part of what drove the project.
Absolutely. So, yeah, talking about inhabiting the characters, making decisions with them, experiencing their stories, and seeing them grow as well, right? You talk about the kind of the distinguishing thing when you boil it all down, the essence of these RPGs is the intrinsic growth of the characters, the way that that's portrayed within the game, and then the effects that that has on the gameplay choices, the gameplay challenges, loops, the draw of these games. This is in some way
Hmm.
about your connection with these characters and seeing them change, right? And seeing the effects
Hmm.
that they have on their world. And I think that's, I mean, I have no disagreements with any of that. Obviously, our you know our personal friendship aside, I think it's a really great book. I really look forward to reading, the complete version when it's finally, uh, you know, in its final evolution here. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I wanted to ask about some of these lineages within the Golden Age games particularly. But so other authors, Aidan Mower has Fight Magic
Mhm.
items, right? And
Yeah.
his whole thing is like this dialectic between like the Dragon Quest strain of games and the Final Fantasy strain of games, and he sees that as kind of constitutive of the large scale genre development or something like that of JRPG. He's just writing about JRPGs.
Right. That was going to be my question. I
Yeah.
I own the book. I haven't finished it, but it was JRPG centric, right?
It's an interesting book. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
I like the boss fight books where they do like deep dives into single games, but
Yeah.
those always involve some amount of contextualizing and talking about like so the Final Fantasy V one, for instance. I forget if it's Chris Kohler, I think, who wrote that one. It's really good because that game never is released on the SNES, very sadly, right? We don't get it until an anthologies version on the PS1, and those
Hmm.
have major flaws, right?
Yeah.
Chiefly in the form of the load times. But he talks about how that book or that game rather is so like core to Japanese understanding of Final Fantasy. Like that's many of the Japanese respondents' like favorite Final Fantasy, and like in a way the
Hmm.
quintessential one for an audience that experienced it in its time and place. Whereas it's kind of an afterthought in a lot of conversations because we didn't have it there. Anyway, so all that to just say, like, the ways in which you look at these games developing over time and things that do improve and things that don't, right? You sort of, I think, very astutely note the ways in which the limitations are actually a benefit to the form, right? And they
Hmm.
they really help the overall experience, even though it's by not allowing certain things, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
And I want
yes.
to add just one more thing on top of that too. Limitations in terms of space, but also limitations in terms of time. Um, think about, say, let's take Final Fantasy, right? There was a period of time, say, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but 1994, 1995, maybe 1996, uh, where there was like a 6 or 7 year span where they released a new Final Fantasy every single year.
Yes, yes.
That's kind of insane to think about today, right? And the reason for that is because it takes them 10 years,
Mhm.
5 years, 6 years to develop a new Final Fantasy. Just saw an interesting article recently that was shared with me by a couple of good friends. Shout out to Major Rage TV and James, um, about how people are not growing up with Final Fantasy anymore. Like, certainly not like we did. One reason for that is because 10 years is a childhood, you know? Um, you could grow up with them in the sense of there's, the ones that already exist. Absolutely, you could make that a part of your childhood. But as far as you getting a new Final Fantasy at the same pace that
Yeah.
they used to put them out, it just doesn't exist anymore.
And
So
it's
I
no longer
think,
the zeitgeist, you're not
yes,
you're in a sort
exactly.
of different timeline if you're experiencing these sequentially, right? Yeah, no.
Yeah,
So what do you take
absolutely.
to be okay? So we have less than a minute on this recording, so this is going to be a bit awkward. Maybe we'll just sort of
Did you wanna stop this recording and then we can start a new one?
well, yeah, let's do that. Let's pause here.
Yeah.
Hold
And
on
then
a
you can
sec.
go ahead and ask. That way we can launch into a thing.
Yeah. All right. So
Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to do this song, which comes from the island of Hawaii.
all right. In real time, this was just a couple minutes here, so picking up where we left off. So what is the essence of the genre as it develops? What is driving that? What is accounting for that, do you think?
Ooh, the essence. We were talking about this yesterday, weren't we, with a platonic ideal?
That's right. Well, we got to work
Yeah.
towards it, though. We got to work towards it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I won't let the rabbit out too soon. So yeah, so my book is partially about the development of the genre. It is about a specific uh, parentheses within the genre's history, and that's the Super Nintendo, obviously. But it touches upon a couple things. I think it's neighbors in the following generation, and it's neighbors in the previous, and some of its rivals at the time. I get a few mentions here and there, but there is a timeline, like I said, and it kind of tracks some things that were released, the major landmarks at the time. But I think it's curious that a lot of people will discuss the uh, evolution of the genre in very limited terms, and I'm guilty of this. I mean, I wrote the book on just Super Nintendo RPGs, so um, take that as you will. But there's a lot to be said about JRPGs, right? There's a lot to be said about CRPGs,
Mhm.
or Western RPGs, if you like. I'm not a huge fan of CRPG as a term because computer RPG is all of them. So it doesn't make a whole lot of
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
But somebody was like, well, it also means console RPG. And I'm like, okay, then
Doesn't
still,
make it better.
or doesn't make it better. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm fine when people use WRPG. I think it's a little awkward, but whatever.
Mm.
Um, the point being that there are a lot of lineages here. There's certainly Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. um, I know you're aware that those aren't even the earliest JRPGs, though.
That's right.
Um, there are some going way back. There was one, gosh, I can't remember the title of it. Underground something rather. That may possibly be the very first Japanese RPG, and it predates both of those titles significantly. um Early stuff like Dragon Slayer, a lot of things that just were not popularized. And that's also true for CRPGs. Like, yeah, there's the D&D games, there's Might and Magic, Ultima, and Wizardry, kind of the three
Hmm.
main pillars of the CRPG tradition. um but there's stuff before that. There's Petit, there's Moria. Moria is a great one. I was like, you didn't ask for permission to make this, did you? You
Absolutely
just
not.
kind of made it. Yeah, that was how it was back then. It was a Wild
Uh,
West kind of thing, which I think is really exciting. There's a great website, CRPG Addict, that's cited a couple times in this book,
mm,
that does a lot of excellent research into the very earliest CRPGs. So last year, 2025, by the research that I saw, that marked the 50th anniversary of computer RPGs as a public commercial thing.
mhm.
Computer RPGs, not tabletop or anything like that. So, and then that's a whole other lineage too. Is a lot of this has been borrowed from tabletop. Now, obviously, with tabletop, there's more improv, there's more kind of human interaction, but
Mm,
with a computer game, the computer kind of takes over the role of the dice rolling and the improv and the game master and stuff like that. Um, I'll admit I'm not super familiar with tabletop RPGs or their
nor am I.
history.
Uh,
And I tend to find that's the case, is like a lot of people who are into computer RPGs aren't into tabletop RPGs, and vice versa. A lot of people who are into JRPGs don't care for CRPGs, and a lot of people who are into CRPGs don't care for JRPGs. I'm just glad that we have this wide range of ways to experience this genre so that you can find your preference quite easily. That I think is the huge benefit of the number of RPGs available.
that's important, I think, to bear in mind. Absolutely, um, that this is you can only ever kind of get your hands around so much of a topic, right? And there's going to be stuff that explodes outside of it. And I do like the idea of trying to think about, just as a thought experiment, what would the platonic form or ideal RPG look like, or something like that, you know? Um, But in terms of the ones that we actually have, of the ones that you've written about in this book and in the volume that's coming after it, do you feel like there's one on the SNES that really encapsulates the the genre and the for good and for ill what that looks like on that system?
That's a great question, and I honestly haven't thought of it really that much.
There isn't just one,
Um,
maybe then, yeah.
well, there might be, but I don't know. That might be something to revisit as a topic in volume 2. But I will not. I'll tell you this: I will not say Chrono Trigger. I don't think that Chrono Trigger is the Platonic ideal. Um, I think Chrono Trigger does things that are a lot smoother and more polished and more unique, certainly,
Yeah.
um, than a lot of RPGs. Um, and that's what sort of makes it stand out, right?
Hmm.
Now, if you pressed me, the hard thing again too is, well, do you say it's a JRPG or do you say it's a CRPG? The way my brain works is giving value to the original and the authentic versus the derivative.
Mm.
So I might say it's Dungeon Master, which
Yeah.
is the oldest game that was ported to Super Nintendo. Uh, Kind of hard to play these games on a Super Nintendo. These first-person dungeon crawler, beg your pardon,
Yeah, yeah.
RPGs. Um, some of them are quite good. I thought Eye of the Beholder was excellent. I thought that was by Capcom. I thought Wizardry 5 was savage, but absolutely brutal game. I mean, yeah, you teleport into a wall and it wipes your party, and you're like, well, and we're talking permadeath too. So yeah,
So there you
um,
go.
yeah, very, very, very tough game. So I don't know. Maybe Dungeon Master, it has that kind of character building that
Mm.
I think is crucial to
Yes, yes.
RPGs. That answer would probably piss off a lot of JRPG fans, and that's okay.
That's
But
good.
yeah, it's fine. And I don't know. I think if I had to pick one from the JRPG uh, canon, I would probably say Final Fantasy 2, and that
Mm.
is Final Fantasy 4. In case anybody's like, "Well, you mean the one where you punch yourself in the face?" No, not that one. No, Final Fantasy 2, as it was titled in North America, but it's Final
Yes.
Fantasy 4. I think that one is really uh is really an ideal of a balance between the mechanical and the narrative
Mm.
in a JRPG, to where it's not so simplified to where you lose that mechanical
Yeah.
aspect. That is still there, but it also very much has that JRPG concept of inhabiting a pre-built character and kind
Right.
of directing their path. Like, you don't get to choose if Cecil becomes a paladin. He will become a paladin,
It's his
right?
arc. Yes, yes.
Right. Whereas, say, something older, certainly like Wizardry or even Final Fantasy 1, you get to make that choice as far as what role they have and how that character grows. And so making that a part of a pre-established story is a very JRPG concept. Um and that's fine. I want to make one other comment about that too, and this is touched on in the book, is this idea of JRPG being a discriminatory term somehow.
Mm. Yeah.
I, I'm not Japanese, but I would rely on um, a Japanese man who helped establish the JRPG genre. That's Hironobu Sakaguchi,
Mhm.
who talked about in an interview how he's proud of JRPGs. He's fine with the term, but because it reflects what is unique about the traditions within the genre, but also how those traditions stem from cultural traditions that are unique to the Japanese culture. I
Totally.
think
Totally.
as a native Hawaiian that's incredibly important to reflect that in your work. Like, this is who you are, your culture. And so to see that kind of pan out through the development of JRPGs, that's absolutely not something to be ashamed of. Um, Now I know that people have used the term JRPG in a discriminatory way, and I obviously think that's wrong. Um, ethically and morally.
Totally.
wrong. But it's even wrong categorically. Like you can't just dismiss an entire category, as it's like when people say, "Oh, that's just a walking sim." It's like walking sims are games too. They're just a different kind of game that you don't like,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah, and I think you do get into a bit of the granular elements of Dungeon Master, of Draken, which is another really early
yeah,
attempt, right, at
ooh,
RPGs
Draken.
on SNES. Uh, this is chronologically, like these would be the ones you would start with if you were to write the book chronologically, I suppose, right?
Right, Draken was the first RPG released in the West for the Super Nintendo. This book is about the Super Nintendo, not the Super Famicom. So
Right.
that's why we're talking about, 46, 47 RPGs and not 200.
There's another book for that one, The Guide to Japanese Role-Playing Games. And I guess that would also leave out all of the ones that are ported from the West into Japan, unfortunately. So,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
that's a
Which is a
book,
great book. Yeah.
yeah,
Excellent book.
that can be consulted here. Um, but I do notice, in terms of your elements of the RPG, Dungeon Master, Draken, some of these don't have a dragon view. They don't have the turn-based element to them, right? And
Yes.
so that
Yeah.
in some way is like a a point of difference as well, right? So in addition to the character selection or character creation or whatever kind of that's maybe a spectrum. Um, there's also this element of what kind of combat are we dealing with here? Is it going to be more strategic? Is it going to give you time to think? Or is it going to be more action oriented? And of course, there's some nuance there as well with like active time battle that gets introduced
Hmm.
with FF 4/2. So so yeah, when you think about the kinds of experiences that these games sort of give rise to, right? They are of course, about stories. They're, of course, about great themes that come up, but they're also about playing a game, and so like, what does the game feel like? Is it stressful? Is it like, you turn the corner and there's a monster there and you got to fight him or is it more sort of calming, almost soothing, like, you get to take your time and decide, am I gonna parry? Am I gonna dodge? Or what am I gonna do in this battle?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, do you have a preference there? Like, do you lean more towards the action oriented, um, or do you lean more towards the turn based? Do you feel like there's maybe pros and cons to both?
Oh, there absolutely are pros and cons to both for sure. And there's a right way and a wrong way to go about building either one, I
Mm.
think. There are some turn based RPGs that are incredibly engaging, compelling, and demanding. There are some that are incredibly dull and boring. Same thing's true for action RPGs. There are some that are incredibly demanding on a player's reflexes and wits and speed and all in that precision, and then there are some that are you literally just mash a single button to get through the whole game. So uh, again, I don't want to make a categorical statement as to say which one's better than the other. I will say that turn-based is listed here as an element of RPGs, but you mentioned the word nuance, which is really important. Which is kind of lost in the larger discussion of this book. But I'm not suggesting that a game which is turn-based or an RPG which is turn-based is more of an RPG
Mm.
than one which is not turn-based. I think that this is just a reflection of the majority design choices that were made as this genre evolved over time. And so it's not to say that one which lacks turn based is less of an RPG, but it's at least some way to help start to categorize this
Totally.
sort of thing. So, but yeah, that said, as far as personal preference, I mean, I kind of hinted at it earlier with the NES. Like, I vastly prefer the action RPGs on NES versus the turn based ones. But that's not so true for other systems. I think looking at the way things are today, like say if I'm just take like Switch or PS5 or something, um, I think today I would vastly prefer a turn-based RPG over an
Interesting.
action one. And part of that is due to just the way that those systems are designed today. So I would rather play, say, Baldur's Gate 3 than Final Fantasy 16.
Mm.
I already know that I don't really care for Devil May Cry style combat. Um, I've played enough Devil May Cry to know that it doesn't work for my fingers or my reflexes or
Mhm.
anything like that. And I get that, 16 they've watered that down to a point where it's more accessible. Um, but in terms of pure preference, I would rather play a strategic sort of thing rather than one that is going to be more demanding of my attention.
Sure.
There's an excellent one I want to give a shout out to. I don't know if you've ever played the Total War series. Um, yeah, Sega and Creative Assembly, I believe. But they're typically historical strategy RPGs. There's several for feudal Japan and Rome and stuff like that. Uh, and they follow that kind of tradition, but beautifully they are real-time strategy slash I'm sorry, uh, turn-based strategy slash real-time tactics. The
Huh?
difference being strategy is the macro decisions,
Mhm.
tactics are the micro decisions. So you take turns on the overworld, moving your armies around, building your bases. When your turn is over, it cycles through to the next faction, on and on and on until your faction turn arrives again. Whenever there's combat, it switches to a real-time battlefield, and that's where you make your micro decisions. Move
Okay.
this unit here, fire this unit at that unit, so on and so forth. It's a nice little kind of pendulum swing of
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm tired of taking turns. Oh, cool, I get to have combat. The combat can be really demanding. Sometimes I slow it down or pause it, just kind of take a view of the battlefield. But then if I get tired of that, I get to go back to taking turns again. So there's a
Now,
lot that kind of plays with both.
am I right in, I think you mentioned that in Indo, of the ones in this volume, is the only one that has that kind of large scale strategy, and then, oh, maybe tactical. I'm not sure if the
Yeah.
distinction's necessary here, but that kind of like different kinds of combat happen in the game. And yeah, if you could just say a little bit more about that, because I that's not a game I'm ever gonna play, but I'm
Right.
curious. I am curious, like, because it's historical. It's got this interesting kind of two-pronged combat or something like that. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
so I
what's up
mean,
with
a
that?
lot of that comes late. It's very Koei. Koei made a lot of strategy games, a lot of them based on history, uncharted waters with the Age of Discovery, so called, and the games like Nobunaga's Ambition, Lord of Darkness, In Way of the Ninja are kind of about more medieval Japan.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm looking at it right now, and I think you're right. I think that's the only, I guess you would say, tactical RPG um, in
Ogre
that
Battle?
list.
Yeah, on the
Oh,
next one.
Ogre Battle, yeah, that would be in volume 2.
That'll be the next volume. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Um, I don't think I've formulated thoughts as to the distinction between strategy and tactical in terms of Ogre Battle just yet.
Okay.
I think that's a tactical RPG, but don't hold me to that.
Fair.
Uh, as far as the first volume goes, though, at a quick glance, yeah, I think Inindo would be the only tactical RPG, but it also kind of represents how much, and something that surprised me when writing this book is how many of these games play around with genre fusion.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people will be like, okay, the RPGs on Super Nintendo are, and then they list, just the turn-based JRPGs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you start to suggest things to them like, what about Lagoon? What about Ogre Battle? What about well, they'll mention Secret of Mana for sure. What about Shadowrun?
Hmm.
What about the Uncharted Waters? And quite a lot of, or EVO, quite a lot of pushback from some people saying, well, that's not an RPG. And then I'll ask why, and they don't really have an answer.
It doesn't feel
Um,
like one. It's not like those ones
exactly
I
the
like.
number of times I would be a billionaire if I had a dollar for every time somebody told me, well, it doesn't feel like one. And the obvious answer to that being what you feel and what I feel are not the same thing.
That's right.
And all the time. Like you might be feeling pain or discomfort right now. I don't. You know, you might feel like you want a chicken sandwich. I might feel like I want a bologna sandwich, you know? There's just feelings are not how you define. Imagine if you open the
Yeah,
dictionary and the dictionary was like, today I feel like the word sacrimonious should mean. It was like, no, that's not how definitions actually work. You can't have
sadly.
genre based on feeling. You can't have category based on feeling, unless it's, you know, you're only categorizing the personal. So
Exactly. Exactly.
um that was the big surprise in writing this book, is that there's a ton of genre fusion going on, and that I think is not something that undermines what RPGs are. In fact, it highlights what RPGs are,
Mhm.
because it tells you how you can incorporate that into other things. So oftentimes I'll meet people who say, well, almost every game's an RPG today, and
Yeah, they go the other
sometimes I
direction. They're
entertain
too
that.
expansive with their definition.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah.
And sometimes I'll push back on that. I was like, do you really think like Journey is an RPG? Do you really think that you know, I'm just kind of going off some of my favorite games.
Gran
Uh
Turismo.
yeah, right. Yeah, do you think that yeah, I'm drawing a blank on video games now. Do you think Katamari Damacy
Oh,
or
great game.
Celeste? Do you think that Bloodborne? Do you think that um Lego Batman? Do you think that Marvel versus Capcom 3, like all of
Yeah,
these
yeah, yeah, yeah.
things
Yeah.
are clearly different. Um and so I think a lot of times people are frustrated with like, oh, and now I got to talk about like 100 NFL games because they include character building in that.
Mhm,
And it's
mhm.
like, why? My reaction is, why care? Why do you care about that? Like, it doesn't
Exactly.
actually take anything away from your typical, you know, sword wielding game with a blue haired hero who has to go defeat an empire and or god. Like, it doesn't stop you from enjoying those things. It's just a way in which some developers have incorporated the mechanical aspect of RPGs into football.
I
And people who enjoy that can enjoy that, and that doesn't take away from what you enjoy.
see. I think this is exactly it for me. The key to the genre is about how this combination of um, more relaxing, Dragon Quest-esque, expected gameplay gradually gets kind of pulled in the direction of more actiony stuff. And
Mhm.
little by little, it's not very pretty when it first happens, but little by little, this amalgamation of genres and this very loose kind of you'll see elements of a genre here that are taken over there, and um, over time it almost is like not moving towards the platonic form of the RPG per se, but we're moving towards the platonic form of the game, the video game
Yeah.
writ
Yeah.
large. What are the elements that are going to make this as appealing to as many people and give them as rich an experience as possible, right? And so you see things like Breath of the Wild, right, which
Mhm.
has a lot of sort of hidden mechanical stuff that's RPG like, and certainly has a very rich story and themes and all that good stuff, which are my favorite parts of an RPG, but certainly there's some really interesting kinds of niches which within video games as a whole, within RPGs, where people can find things that they really like, and so I've
Yeah.
heard you say that FF Tactics is actually your favorite of the Final Fantasy named Final Fantasy
Thank you. Yeah.
games, right? Because Chrono
Yeah.
Trigger, of course, is the best Final Fantasy. But
Of course. Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's like and and there's things about that are radically different. You don't get to explore a world freely or whatever it is. And yet uh, it is clear that it's within this kind of neighborhood of or family of games. And it belongs there. And um, so yeah, I guess this for me really takes off in this era, and that's what makes this the golden age for me, is that you see this experimentation. It's still fresh, it's still new, and you get some amazing examples of it that are not surpassed. And then it sort of everything starts to feel sort of samey, and I maybe I'm just getting old, but yeah, I'm not excited about new games anymore the way I
Right,
used
right,
to
right.
be. So yeah.
Well, that's not an abnormal take. I
That's
mean,
a, that's a thing. Yeah.
don't feel too bad. That's not to belittle it by saying it's common, but it's a frequent take that I'll hear a lot. So don't feel alone in that. I think we're looking at now an industry which is very different than it was in 1991. Um, it's certainly broader and bigger in a way that there's a whole conversation there in a way that devalues, say, let's say, risk when you're dropping millions and millions of dollars on a project.
Mhm.
So everything kind of comes out looking like the MCU at a certain point. But yeah, and I think too that goes back to what I mentioned at the start here, is that a lot of people will still have older games on their top lists, their best ofs, and that may be because of childhood nostalgia. It may not be. I mean, I've met people who have played Chrono Trigger for the first time. Just last week, I was talking to somebody who just finished it for the first time, had never played it as a kid, and was blown away. That's not to say everybody will be blown away by it. Obviously, no game is for everyone, but I love those stories. I mean, that's how you quote test nostalgia. You get somebody to play who wasn't even alive back then, and see how it also quote holds up today.
Mhm.
And I think that's a fundamental theme in this book, is that um classics are things that never finish saying what they have to say. Can't remember who said that, but these things will remain classics for generations, if we continue to remember them, and they'll still be enjoyable. There's no reason why uh, a majority of these games won't still be enjoyable by new generations
Oh,
to
totally.
come.
Totally. Well, yeah, so let's dive in a little bit to some of the specifics here. Like, we don't
Yeah.
have to go in any particular order, but I kind of want to open it up to, like, are there games in here that like you said, in a general way, you're surprised at how many kind of interesting crossovers of components of other genres found their way in? I know you have a particular love of the roll 'em up, so maybe that's a place
Yes,
to
the
start.
roll 'em up.
Haven't talked about that yet, so let's
Yeah.
uh, let's make the case for the roll 'em up as a thing.
Sure. And it is, you phrased it right. There is a case to be made. The vast majority, well, a majority of comments about the book, specifically the list of RPGs included, um, targeted two games, King of Dragons and Knights of the Round. Now, curiously, a lot of people have only played one of those two. Um, I've met a lot of people who are like, they'll be like, "Why is Knights of the Round here?" And I'm like, this, and this, and they're like, "Well, I don't see it." And then I'll be like, "How come you didn't mention King of Dragons or Magic Sword for that matter, or Dragon View, because it also uses a beat 'em up combat system?" And they're like, "Well, I haven't played those." Okay, well, I have, and I wrote the book, so that ought to be enough. But it's not, right, realistically, and that's how those conversations go. So the actual case for them being, um, try to summarize this as neatly as I can. Imagine an arcade beat 'em up. Your favorite one. Let's say it's The
Oh, it's
Simpsons.
X-Men. It's definitely X-Men.
X-Men,
I know
yes.
Turtles in Time is like technically better, but
Turtles in
the
Time,
X-Men
yeah,
one,
yeah.
I love the
Oh
X-Men
yeah,
arcade game
I
with the
would
two
say that too.
screens,
Yeah.
you know. And all
Yes, the huge one with like 6 players, yeah.
that.
Super great. X-Men, Welcome to Die. It's so good. So okay, so imagine, your favorite arcade beat 'em up. Now imagine you had to incorporate RPG elements into that beat 'em up, but it's still in an arcade format. That means coin op, that means short gameplay bursts, that means a very short game. What would that look like? Now, I would posit that it would look very close to what Knights of the Round and King of Dragons attempt to do. And then looking at a broader context that a lot of people don't think about, is that Capcom actually tried to mess around with this notion of what happens if we fuse RPG progression, intrinsic character progression, with the arcade beat 'em up. What would that look like? And so they did King of Dragons, Knights of the Round, both released same year. They did Magic Sword, which is even lighter, I think, on those things. They did those two Dungeons and Dragons games. They've been released as Chronicles of Mystara. I believe one of them is Shadows over Mystara. It's been a long time since I played those, but same sort of thing. And since then, we've seen other developers kind of play around with that notion of, okay, what does this look like if we combine beat 'em ups and RPGs? And I've asked people, these questions, and sometimes there's still pushback, and I kind of come to, well, do you think it's impossible to fuse those two genres? And if so, why? Are there genres that cannot be fused?
Hmm.
In that case, you've got a harder argument to make than I do.
That's right. You got to prove that this thing can't happen when
Exactly. Like,
almost
good
almost
luck.
anything is possible in these. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
this reminds me of like a really famous debate within game studies is like, so, is it the case that games tell stories, basically? And somebody,
Mhm.
I forget the name, it's anyway, he has this argument like if I throw a ball to you, you don't expect it to tell you a story or something. He thinks this is like a knockdown argument against games telling stories. And then I heard
Hmm.
someone just the other day say, "Well, I could easily like program a ball such that when it's caught, it starts telling a story." Like there you
Right.
go. You thought you had this like logically, ironclad knockdown argument, but
Well, that's weird. I
it's
hadn't
easy.
heard that before.
It's a good
Um,
quote. I like it. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, why would two characters throwing a ball not be the start of a
There you
story or the
go. I'm
premise of
thinking
a
of
story?
Xenogears. I don't know if you got this far, but there's a part where Faye and his mom are tossing the ball back and forth, and I always think of that. I'm
Right.
like, that's
Certainly that can happen in a story, but you could start a story with
yes,
that,
that's kind of
that's
his
kind of
core
strange. Yeah.
core
It's
memory.
almost like, well, I mean, that's very pertinent to the book. What does he mean by story? And if
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
can't agree on that, then you can't have the argument.
That's
And
a good
so
question. Yes.
that's what it's come down to with RPGs is when somebody goes, well, that's not an RPG or that is an RPG. Why didn't you include it? And then I'll ask them, what do you think an RPG is? Because
Yeah.
we're clearly talking at odds.
We're talking past each
Um,
other. Yeah.
and if they say something like it's any game in which you play a character, then I'm like, I'm sorry, but we're not using the same language, because in that case, this book needs to have Mario All Stars and Super Metroid and like pretty clearly, obviously non RPGs. But it's not the definitive book of SNES games in which you play as a character. It's a little more condensed than just that. So
Yeah.
that would be my argument for roll 'em ups.
Okay.
Shout out to Third Strongest Mole, one of the dudes on Retro Logic podcast. He and I have gone back and forth on that a couple times, very, very amiably. Um, I really respect the way that he thinks and the comments that he's left me and things like that. But yeah, there are a couple people that are like, I just don't see it, and I'm in a place where I'm like, and that's fine. Like
Yeah.
if I've laid out my argument, but if it doesn't convince you, then there's not much more I can do. I'm not going to take it out of the book because you don't agree with my argument, because I agree with my argument,
Yeah.
obviously,
I think
and
it's
that's
good.
enough for it to be in the book. But this is RPGs, both traditional and hybrids. That
Yes.
would just make for a lousy title, obviously. So include all that. So
That well, yeah, and I think it's important that the book be parsimonious to a certain extent about what it lets in and what it has to say. That doesn't quite make the cut.
yeah,
I don't know if there were some that were really close that you feel like, well, this is kind of an edge case and maybe it gets a mention, or like, were you pretty like surprised once you sort of had your setup of the nine elements and does it have most of them? Does it have these really important character focused
yeah.
ones in particular? Were there ones that were just like hard for you to say, "Ah, I can't quite get that one to fit or
Yeah, oh my gosh, yes. So anticipating volume two, there's not going to be a timeline in volume two. I'm going to replace that with an honorable mentions section.
nice, nice.
So to kind of close out that second volume. So there will be a really brief discussion of a bunch of different games that are really close, I think, but clearly not in the same sort of category. So the big one is obviously A Link to the Past, Zelda.
Mhm.
I would love to talk about Zelda. I love A Link to the Past, but
Ah,
I firmly believe that it's an action adventure.
it's a bit different.
And yeah, and the adventure genre I think is harder to define than the RPG genre, but they are clearly two distinct lineages. And I think I make the point in this book, compare Dragon Quest and King's Quest 1 and 1.
That is in here.
Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah, they're different. They're different genres. They have a lot of similarities, but the key mechanic difference again is that core intrinsic character progression.
Mhm.
So Zelda, yeah, Link to the Past is right up there. Couple games that fall into that adventure category could pop in there. One that kind of breaks my heart that I couldn't include was Super EDF, Super Earth Defense Force. It
Mm,
is a shoot 'em up, a side-scrolling shmup, with the jet and you shoot aliens and
so
crap
fun.
like that.
So
But
fun, those
yeah, I
games.
love those games. I love them. The cool thing about this one is it has a leveling up system. It
Ah,
uses its points as experience points and you level up weapons. The problem is, um, when you start looking at it, certainly in this kind of quantified elemental perspective, there's no narrative in game.
no
You're
character.
not playing as yeah, you're not playing as a character.
That's the killer.
There's no roles. There's no statistics. Um, and no statistics is so I tested this a couple times. Your weapons will always do the same amount of damage. It's
Yeah.
Link's wooden sword in Zelda 1 versus Link's sword in Zelda 2 after getting a
Mm,
few levels, right? So that fundamental difference is okay, the level ups are applying just to the weapons, not to any actual kind of character. And I get like you could abstract that down to a point to where that difference is meaningless, but as far as making a decision of yes or no, I think that game in particular is definitely worth an honorable mention, but it didn't make the cut. Um,
You know what really surprised me as I was looking at this list? I didn't realize no Dragon Quest slash Dragon Warriors
oh,
make it
pain.
across the pond, you know? What
Yeah,
the heck?
huge. Yeah, the agony of that. So a lot of yeah. Again, a lot of pushback against the roll 'em ups, a lot of pushback against, well, why didn't you include and this conversation again, I would be a billionaire if I had a dollar for every time. Um, people will look at this list, which I've shared many times over the past several years, and be like, "Where's Bahamut Lagoon,
Hmm.
dude? Where's Treasure of Rudras?" And these are different people, right? So, some guy will be, "Where's the Sailor Moon RPG? Why didn't you include Live Alive? Where's the
Oh,
no Dragon Quest?" And it's like, okay, think about this just for a second. I could include, say, just those, 6 or 7 games that you
just the
mentioned,
top
kind of
ones. Yeah,
the
just the best
fan
ones.
favorites, right?
Yeah.
Because nobody mentions every Super Famicom game because nobody in the West honestly cares about all of them, right?
Yeah.
Like there are the fan favorites that have had official translations. People love those, and rightfully so. I've played a couple of them myself. I love them. Seiken Densetsu 3, Trials of Mana. I love that game.
Mm.
I would have loved to talk about that game on here. I can't though because I created a smaller context that allows me to have a more manageable list. Again, we're talking about nearly 50 RPGs versus nearly 200. I mean, there are a lot of RPGs that did not come out in the West, especially if we're talking about genre fusion. So the easy answer is that's too many games. I wouldn't have a manageable list. Many of them do not have translations or and certainly not official
Oh
translations.
yeah.
That means I'm relying on tools to mechanically do the translation for me. I don't like that thought. Um, I think I would love to do, and I've told people this, I'd love to do a Super Famicom RPG book or set of books eventually,
There you go.
but that's not what this book was intended to be.
Okay,
So,
gotta
yeah.
pause you there. Sorry, we're about to run out of time again. So
Yes.
round three,
Perfect.
fight.
Okay. Awesome.
I remember days when we were younger. We used to catch up round the Colau hills we'd ride on horseback. So long ago.
All right. So we're back and we have, I don't know, a half hour until you've got to start streaming Uncharted Waters.
Something
So
like that.
we've got to start kind of wrapping this up a little bit. There's still a ton to discuss. I mean, we haven't even touched on some of the best games that are in here, and I do want to at least leave a little bit of time for that. And again, I just what in your mind is it that sort of sets apart the really standout games here from the ones that are, for various reasons, just not as well known, not as well liked? What is it that makes the good ones really good?
That's a great question. I think there's two schools of thought potentially on that. One is polish, the other is creativity. So there are really creative games in here that aren't very good, but they're fun or fun to think about, maybe because they're creative. Draken is probably a good example of that. Draken is not very fun to play, but there's a ton that's really creative in Draken.
There's a lot of lore.
Um,
It sounds like they went
oh
to
my
town with
gosh,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of that cut, unfortunately, from the Super Nintendo version. But find the PC storybook sometime for Draken. It is a read. Um, the other school of thought, I think, maybe where I would fall in more is polish. I think the best games on this system are the ones that are the most polished, and that could mean things like smoothness, things like um, how fun are the systems in terms of how accessible. I keep saying smooth. Um, Let me give you a specific example from Uncharted Waters. So Uncharted Waters is pretty fun, but um, certainly not fun in the way that ActRaiser is fun, or fun in the way Secret of Mana is fun. It's a much slower burn kind of thing, but it's really fun when you make $1 million because you sailed, to Africa and bought some gold and traded it for stuff in Europe.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that is, if game design is about that carrot, right, that's always in front of you, and the game gives you a nibble of that carrot, that's a delicious nibble of carrot, let me tell you that. But there's probably the biggest flaw to me in Uncharted Waters is there's dueling. So you build up a fleet. There's 6 different characters, so it's easy to compare it to like something like Octopath Traveler that has different campaigns or different routes, but they're all crossover, which is really interesting. So you build your fleet, you could go to war, you could pirate, you could be pirated, lots of different things. Right now, I'm kind of picking on Spain. I'm Portuguese in the game, and I'm Portuguese in real life, so it felt nice and appropriate there. But in a naval battle, you could obviously blow the other ships to smithereens, or they could do the same to you with cannons. They could board you, and the crew can fight, or your flagship could make contact with the enemy flagship and trigger a duel.
Yes.
Now, in a duel, if you win the duel, you actually win the whole naval battle. The whole fleet of the enemy will surrender.
Okay.
Which is a little one-sided, right? Like, you can actually just have one ship with no cannons and charge their flagship and get a duel, and if you don't have enough crew, sometimes the enemy crew will block you from having the duel. But if you load up on dudes, sailors, and charge the ship, you could trigger a duel and defeat an armada like that. So there's a bit of that's a little too much abstraction of reality. But the duel itself almost plays like a Tetramaster kind of thing, which is real weird. So you've got multiple cards that are random that you choose from. Yeah, you choose one per turn. And for defense, there'll be parry, block, and dodge. For offense, there'll be thrust, lash, and slash or strike. And each of those kind of works like a rock, paper, scissors type thing. The problem with that is it is very RNG based. It does seem pretty clear that the computer is spying on you while you make your choice. The only advantage that you have, well, two advantages that you have are statistical. If you have a higher level, even if you fail, and get a hit in on your character, you won't take as much damage because your statistic advantage. And then the other thing is you could see what equipment the enemy is using. If they're using a claymore or a flamberge or something, a bastard sword or something like that, you could see what advantage that weapon would have in thrusting, lashing, or striking. And so you can kind of predict what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really cool. But the point that I'm driving at is it is not well implemented to generate fun. It feels really unfair a lot of
Yeah.
times. It feels like a lot of the complaints that people have about Tetramaster, the card game, right? Is
Don't get me started.
no, and see, this is controversial as well. I really like Tetramaster. I think Tetramaster is this beautiful, elegant kind of crystallization of what an RPG is. Because let me ask you, sir, Wesley. Okay, an RPG is about statistical advantage, right? But
Indeed.
there's still an RNG element. When you slash, you might miss, or you might connect, but that damage range goes up if you have a higher offensive rating.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it's the exact same thing in Tetramaster. You're not always going to win just because you have a higher offensive
The better
rating or a
card.
higher
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
defensive rating, but a better card has more statistical advantage. And I think that's what RPGs are.
That's fair. That's
I
fair.
think that helps people kind of like Tetramaster a little more, but at the same time, I also get really why people don't like Tetramaster at all.
Well, I think the word implementation is really important here too. Like, how do
Yes.
the components of the systems work together, whether well, not well, certain
Yeah.
things. Well, like in in a big way, in these games, it's the localization, right? That can be the thing that
Yes.
really just like the polish is it's beyond that. It's like this is kind of garbled or completely unreadable at a certain
Yes. No, if the
uh,
game does not communicate those rules to you accurately, you will be frustrated.
yeah.
Because what feels unfair is when you lose and you don't know why, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was early dueling for me in Uncharted Waters, where I'm like, oh, there's no way to know what the opponent's doing, but they're clearly looking at what I'm doing, right? And there is a way to skew that to your advantage.
You kind of figure it out.
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but it is not something that's communicated well. I
Yeah.
don't think Tetramaster is really communicated well, and that could be why a lot of people don't prefer it over Triple Triad.
So, in terms of games from this era, um, the ones that I most wish that I had played as a kid are the Breath of Fire games. From
Oh yeah.
based on what you kind of have to say about those, uh, and I never played one until PlayStation. I don't know which number in the series it was, but it was fun. Like I borrowed it from my friend, but I didn't keep it long enough to get through the whole game. Um, and so and just maybe those are ones that we could kind of end on here is what is it about those games, despite all of the things that are weird about them or that give people pause? What is it that really connected with you that you just love those games so much? It really comes through in the writing.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. So I have a degree in theology, that I
Yeah.
don't really use, except for when I wrote this book. There's a very religious aspect of these games, that isn't super discussed beyond the meme of you kill a god at the end of the story
Mhm, mhm.
in a lot of these. But that kind of theothanatos, if you like, is uh really prevalent, sorry, in a way that sort of makes you wonder, why is this such a common trope?
Yeah.
And I think that the Breath of Fire games are emblematic of that in a way that none of these other games are. They're sort of built around that idea. There was a joke I came up with once that was just like, people will be like, they hate religion and classical music, and then they'll play a JRPG, Just like that's what they're made of, practically. A lot of these games are just religion and classical music, um, and ancient, mythic tropes.
Hmm.
Now, yeah, I have a lot of personal attachment to the Breath of Fire games because of my childhood, because of the interest that they gave me in studying comparative religion. Um, and so I value them for those reasons. I also think they're pretty good. I think we were talking about this on stream not too long ago, but uh, what do you think is the average game on this list? What is the average Super Nintendo RPG? The 5 out of 5. Um, for me, I would say Breath of Fire 1. I think Breath of Fire 1 is pretty traditional. I think it's pretty static. Um, there's not a whole lot wrong with Breath of Fire 1. There's not a whole lot right about Breath of Fire 1. It can be rough, but it's a pretty traditional um game. It does some unique things, it does some boring things. I think when you get to Breath of Fire 2, I think Breath of Fire 2 is excellent. Worst thing about it is the localization.
Hmm.
But the music, the visuals are dialed up. It has really fascinating, interesting characters. It has a lot of great moments. It has some great enemies. It has a lot of drama. It has a lot of interesting side quests and things to do. Um, so that I value to quite a bit. I don't think the one that you probably played was 3. I think more people played 3 than 4 on PS1. But and that's just a guess. I don't know the stats in front of me.
Yeah.
I think 3 is the best game in the series.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
I think that 2 is my personal favorite in the series. So they're just
And
great.
yeah, and that idea of like these games can get you interested in stuff. I
Yeah.
think that goes across all different genres, of course, right? But the kinds of things they're likely to get you interested in are going to be different. Maybe
Hmm.
maybe you play the Mario games and you get fascinated by mushrooms and
Yeah.
turtles and stuff.
You decided to become a plumber when you grew up?
You
Yeah.
love yeah. There's that, right? Um, you play Metal Gear Solid and you're like, okay, I definitely want to go into international relations or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Cold War
Yeah.
history, media studies. But yeah, I think that RPGs are kind of unique in that they get people interested in storytelling and in the power of storytelling. And
Mhm.
I think that that makes them the natural ally of people who otherwise might not like video games, for various reasons. But particularly because they see them as sort of like this waste of time, and that there's better ways to spend your time. Like go listen to classical music, go read Dickens and Shakespeare, But actually, if you want someone to like those things, there's very few better ways than to just say, that game, you really shouldn't play that game. It's boring. It's got classical music. It's got a lot of
Mhm.
text in it. Like that game, you're not old enough to play that game. And then sure enough, they'll get really interested in those things. I think there's a kind of um, yeah, a kind of preservation to come back to that theme, right? That these games they carry along through unexpected ways, they carry along this power of storytelling and
Yeah.
of myths and religious stories in particular. I think that's something that I definitely love about them. That's something I think will make them stand the test of time, and that I hope people continue to discover about these games. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so
Absolutely.
so thoughts on preserving them, on helping people discover them, helping people appreciate them. How does this book fit into that project of yours? And where do you see like that going from here?
Um, well, a book has a kind of permanence to it, so I just hope that someday more people will sort of discover this thing. It's hard because kind of looking at indie publishing, it's like you're not really, publishing millions of copies or anything like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things are kind of preserved on discussions online, YouTube channels and things like that.
Mhm.
In today's day and age, um And so I've thought about kind of making that a sister project, but there's so many things one could do. Um, but yeah, I think that it's it's not enough to sort of celebrate just the nostalgia of things because eventually our generation will pass too.
Mhm, mhm.
And what our legacy is and what things we leave behind and what things we attach value statements to will be what the next generation either celebrates or condemns. And so there's I think there's a big argument for letting the next generation experience these games for themselves, um, not forcing them to. I've run into that as an accusation. That's bizarre. But giving kids the opportunity to
Yeah.
experience these things as part of a heritage of art that they get to participate in, um, and find what they like. They may not like the same games. There are a couple games that my kids have picked up that they've really loved. There's a couple that they picked up, they're like, yeah, and that's fine. They have
Mhm.
their own preferences. But I think the exciting thing for me with this book was getting past preference and getting to, okay, what value statements can you make beyond that? Because
Yeah.
yeah, I could give you like a ranked, which games I think are the best and which I think are the worst on this, or which ones I really liked or not. And a couple of people have asked for that. They're like, it'd be cool if you ranked the whole list. And like, I could. I don't know what value that,
Mm.
I see that holds. If it holds value for you, that's awesome. Um, but I wanted to get beyond the preferential and into, again, what are these games saying?
Mm.
Because if they are talking about questions of religion, if they are talking about mythic things that continue to pop up as tropes in our stories, if they are motivating people to pursue different avenues of education, then those things will be evergreen, right? Like people
Exactly.
will always want to be storytellers.
Exactly.
You can't not, you know so uh if that motivation is in these games, I think that'll be what continues to resonate. Whether people are like, well, the graphics are a bit outdated or not, that's about as superficial as it gets. um so I definitely didn't want to go that route.
Yeah.
um and yeah, I tried. That's the subtitle of the book.
There's more to come. I mean, how far are you into the writing pro like are you still in the research stage, kind of looking at how do I want to structure the argument about this or that game? Like where are you at with the
Sure. So I've been playing through these one by one, and I've written each of these chapters sort of one by one,
Mhm.
and I'll come back and revisit them after they've cooled for a little bit. But generally, I'm researching one game at a time. That is something too that I wish more people understood, um, in terms of criticism about the book. Like, say, oh, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. Is like, yeah, but I'm also researching like nearly 50 games.
Yeah.
Like you may be an expert in the Seventh Saga, and know everything about the Seventh Saga. I'm not claiming to know everything about the Seventh Saga, but I put some research into studying the Seventh Saga in its printed materials, in printed literature about it, and in digital and online resources, interviews and development notes and things like that. So, um, it's a 600-page book nearly, so I'm not gonna get everything correct.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming to be an expert on any of these games individually, but I think the strength of the book is what it encompasses in its totality,
Yeah.
which is I don't think anybody has written a book like this before. Um, for one, it's pretty hard to do it. It's hard to get through playing all of these games.
Yeah.
I haven't met anybody yet who has played all 46, 47 of these. I can't remember the exact number, but I'm sure they're out there. I just haven't met them yet.
I'm not sure they're out there, but maybe, and maybe again, it will inspire, people to play along at least with a few of the games that they hadn't before or that they want to revisit.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, for me, this makes me really want to play Breath of Fire and dig into that. It makes me really interested in just the breadth of experiences that people have growing up with these games. I think that's another angle of like, in terms of people who study this stuff. I think this is extremely valuable, and everyone has stories. You know, not everyone has as much knowledge or as much experience, but everyone has something that um, they can kind of contribute to helping us collectively understand, why do these games mean so much? Um, what impact have they had on people? And,
Yeah.
you know,
And to make a small comment on that too
yeah.
is there's a lot of lording over fandoms out there. It's
Mhm.
a weird kind of behavioral phenomenon where you'll see people treat knowledge like it's a currency. I think that's wrong. I think that we shouldn't be trying to pretend we know more about something than somebody else, and then that makes us either a better person or more knowledgeable or more capable of having the discussion. Whereas I think, the diversity of people's opinions, memories, and experiences makes for a better fandom when we allow those things to be a part of the discussion. So in this book, I acknowledge there are plenty of people who contributed their games, who contributed their stories, their memories,
Ah,
who
yes.
contributed, their anecdotes, people who helped me do research, people who helped do fact checking, people who contributed to the book, so that this is not just me giving all my thoughts. There's a lot that went into this. So yeah, I don't think that we should have kings and queens of fandoms. I
Yeah,
think we should have people in fandoms.
totally. It's the kind of thing that when you share what you know and they share what they know, everyone gains from it. It's the
Right.
purest
Yeah.
form of exchange in that way. And yeah, no, I'm honored to be mentioned in the book in the acknowledgments since I got a chance to read the Earthbound chapter in the early drafts. And yeah, there's a ton of people who have their kind of anecdotal stories that pop in, and you have little sort of inset quotes from developers, from the ones who worked on these games, the ones who were inspired by these games. So yeah, there are a lot of voices that make their way into the book. The foreword by sorry, what's his name? Alex Donaldson, the one of the founders of RPG site or whatever it is. And um, so yeah, there's a wealth of material in here, and so like I said, just thanks again for writing it, and putting in all of your time. Thanks for taking some time to talk about it, and I am really looking forward to reading the rest of it when it is making its appearance in this timeline. So
I appreciate you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the book and its content. It's very refreshing to be able to talk about the book itself.
yes,
So I look forward to chatting with you again, hopefully sooner rather than later. I'd
definitely.
love to continue to have discussions like this one.
That would be my pleasure. I'll tell you, my next project that I'm working on, I want to, I know this is maybe a little bit evil, but I want to get some sort of, Claude code thing rigged up where it has like the text of Earthbound in English, and it has the text of Mother 2 in Japanese, and it allows me to like see those things next to each other, and so I can think about them. And then I need like a little Japanese dictionary maybe there too to help me with
Hmm.
like what's the literal meaning of these words, because I'm not very good at it, but I'm trying to basically learn Japanese through playing Mother 2, and then do some comparison and stuff with the localization. Obviously being helped by the work of Clyde Mandolin here, as
Yeah.
he's done some amazing stuff with kind of all elements of that. Anyway, so that's what I'm planning to get into here, and I think you have thought very deeply about Earthbound, among other things, and its context within the SNES. So I'll definitely be in touch as I'm working on
Yeah,
that for sure.
I'd love to. I mean, I don't speak Japanese. I always quote that Chris Farley SNL skit, but that's okay. I think too that kind of goes back to the whole lording over
Indeed.
things. You'll meet some people who will make that a sticking point. It's like, well, but you do realize these games were localized, and that's the versions that I'm discussing. These are the
Yes.
official products. So, I'm more power to you. I'll help in any way that I can. I'd be glad to.
Dude.
Earthbound is still a very, very hard nut to crack. It's like
Yeah.
you open up a walnut and there's another shell underneath the initial shell.
Or a dimensional warp of some kind into to the
Yeah,
mind of
something like that.
Shigesato
Yeah.
Itoi, which is a
Yeah.
very, very bizarre place.
Yeah.
Oh, I have to ask you, are you a butterfly dreaming you're a man, or are you a plate of sashimi? Did you ever decide?
I'd rather be the sashimi.
Mm,
Because then I'm
delicious.
delicious. So yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What are you, so aside from the book, what are you working on these days? Where can people find you and keep up with all your stuff?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I don't have a release date for volume two. I am in the process of working on it. But in the meantime, right now I'm really focusing on just the streaming. So I do a stream to YouTube and Twitch. You can find me at the Well-Red Mage, RED, not READ, the Well-Red Mage. And yeah, I'm on every weekday, 1 p.m. Central. I know it's in the middle of the day. I'm sorry about that, but we're playing through every Super Nintendo RPG, and we're almost done. I have 8 to finish, 7 or 8.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a long ride. So I don't know what I'm gonna do after that. We've been talking about maybe streaming the Game Boy RPGs via Super Game Boy,
Hey,
um the NES RPGs, dun dun dun. Or I mean, fortunately that's a small list. It's not
not so long.
as long as the SNES list. That's probably a one volume task. Plus they're shorter, simpler games. But the big one I'd love to do is the PS1. um
Yeah.
I think the PS1 would be excellent. Collecting for it would be hard. I'm trying to play all these on original hardware, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one being like they're harder on original hardware. Uncharted Waters, we were talking about, like you could break that game with save
Save
states
states would save a
easily.
lot of time, that's for
It
sure.
would save us so much time. So, but it's a totally different experience,
Uh,
therefore, playing it on original hardware. So it could be tough for PS1. Plus, I might die of old age before I finish playing every
no.
PS1 RPGs. There's a lot of them. I think I looked and it's like I started building a list and it's something like near 100. So
Okay.
that's a lot of games,
Well,
especially when they're longer.
I know this is not the project per se, but one thing you could do, you could, cast it out and say, hey, can you take on this game? Can you take on that
Yeah.
game? And then you do
And I
like kind
thought
of an
about that.
edited volume of some kind, instead.
Yeah.
You'd
Yeah, I
still
thought about
contribute.
that. There are definitely some people that I think of who really intimately know a few of these games.
Mhm.
Um, so the thoughts crossed my mind for
Okay.
sure.
All right.
Because otherwise, so a question somebody asked me previously about Volume One of the SNES RPGs is which was the hardest chapter to write. It was actually Final Fantasy VI.
You say so in the
Um,
book. Yeah, you're like, this is the one I
yeah.
left for the last.
Oh, okay.
This
I
was the
didn't
big one.
remember
It's
if
in there.
I
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I
yeah.
mentioned it. Yeah. And that was just for the sheer intimidation of it, you
Well, I
know.
like the take. It's an opera. I think that's right on. I think that's
Yeah.
on target
Yeah.
for sure.
I think that was I mean that's such a bandied about interpretation of that, but I really wanted to be like, okay, what does that mean? People will
Hmm.
say things all the time. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And some people will be like, well, it's an opera like Star Wars. I'm like, I don't know if that's what that means, So, kind of looking at that certainly from a meta perspective, because the game has a literal opera in it.
Yes.
Um, but then, for me, looking at it through the lens of the Divine Comedy, I think was a
Yes.
more interesting kind of perspective, because I was reading that at the time and it just kind of, begun to click.
Ah.
Um, so
So my
anyway,
f- my
we're
frequent
off that rabbit.
collaborator, Alex Schmid, is actually he's just published a long piece about video game adaptation with respect to Dante specifically. I'll send you the link to it. It's open source
Yeah, please do.
online. But yeah, no, I think, comparisons to other media, comparisons to specific works, um, I think do form a really significant piece of what I'm interested in, when it comes to playing these games at this stage of my life. You know, not for everybody, of course, and definitely not maybe the first thing that people would get from them when they're playing them as kids. But
Hmm.
yeah, they're just perennial. They're evergreen. There's always more to
Yeah.
get from them. Yeah.
Well, it acknowledges too that these games don't come out of a vacuum.
Mhm.
The people who made them read books and had favorite movies and listened to specific pieces of music or played previous games, were inspired by those things. So it's sort of like rethinking those thoughts after them and kind of discovering, like, I'm not claiming that, they based Final Fantasy VI on Dante's comedy, or that they read it before they
No,
did
yeah.
FF6, but there's certainly references to that in there,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I think the Kefka Doom Tower is going to be the one that where you're like, okay, like that's Caravaggio right there
There
for
you
sure.
go.
Like, yeah.
It's good stuff. Okay. Well, I'll let you go. Thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, thanks
Okay.
very much, sir.
See ya.